special meeting of Tonganoxie USD 464 Board of Education for Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I'd make a motion to approve the agenda.
Is there a second?
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 6-0. Okay, we have one agenda item for tonight. I think this is one of those things where, I don't know that we need to be here all night, but at the same time, I don't want to shortcut any conversation. We can't add action items, but at the end of the day, I think any discussion that we would have around Mr. Feldkamp's replacement would be on the table given the agenda that's in front of us. So don't want to shortcut any conversations at all. That we'll eventually get to is to hopefully narrow the field of the 6 RFP responses that we got down to a more manageable number. I'd thrown out 3 or 4. I don't know that that's set in stone by any stretch. If as we talk through these, anyone has strong feelings about someone that they feel like ought to be included, there's no reason at the end of the day we couldn't interview all 6 of them. I just think from a ease of getting to a decision, I think if we narrowed the field a little bit right now, it'll make the discussions next week go a little bit. To narrow the field again, if anyone has strong feelings about any of them, I think we shouldn't hesitate to bring them in. I think at the end of the day, trying to narrow it down is a little bit of a hard task from my perspective. 6 to 50 pages, I think, is somewhat hard to digest, but also probably not indicative of the personalities that we'll engage with. So I think in no way does this, supersede or make the actual interview next week any less important. So I think getting to meet the actual people we'll deal with is probably more important than what we're going to do tonight. But again, I think it's a necessary step. I think the couple other points I'd make, and then we can open up the floor for discussion. The cost of these varies somewhat dramatically relative to each other, but in my opinion, relative to the importance of this decision, the cost is fairly inconsequential. So while I know it's not free and we have a fiduciary responsibility to our taxpayers, I also think that in my mind, cost is way, 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 way down the line of the factors that ought to play into this. I do have some things that I want to talk about towards the end for next week, but I think I'd pause there for a second, see what questions, comments there are from other board members, and then we can open up discussion on the RFP proposal specifically. Feedback to my dialogue.
So from my personal perspective, I like the way you got them ranked. I'm good with 3 or 4. I agree with you in the packets that they sent. I'm more of a meet, greet, and get a feel and a gauge of what that's like versus a nice packet. It would be nice to get.
Let me interrupt you
at least
real quick for the record.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the way that I ranked them. Let's unpack that just for half a second, since everybody can watch this. So
Right.
what we'd asked the board to do was to kind of rank individual choices. I tried to compile those. It wasn't an exact science, but I did my best to kind of rank based on the feedback I got from people. So it feels directionally correct. I don't think it's a perfect science. So just kind of for the record and for posterity, that's what was involved in that. Sorry for interrupting.
No, you're not interrupting. So that's kind of how I feel. I do believe that the cost is not as big a factor for me in the understanding of the importance of the job and what we owe the staff and students of Tonganoxie. It's probably the third largest thing that I've had to do in my time on the board, and I feel it's important. That's partially reason that made me decide to run a third term. So I take this serious, and I think it's important we get a good candidate, interview the candidates to move forward.
Okay. Other comments, feedback?
Well, I think especially with what's going on in Des Moines right now, I think we need to be real careful about being very specific about what we expect from these companies,
Yeah.
and make sure that they are very thorough.
And I think that's yet another reason why, I think hiring a search firm to help us is almost a foregone conclusion. I mean, these folks do this every day. We're going to do this. I guess Chris and Karen maybe, or Stephanie have got to do this a couple of times, but most of us are probably going to do this once, hopefully. So, but I think, Linda, your point's well taken. Do we want to kind of jump in and go one by one? How would you guys like to approach this? Any thoughts? I can jump in. How about if I do that? Everybody go with that?
Sure.
So, I think as I look through these, in my mind, I would say there's one kind of regional firm in McPherson and Jacobson, and then 2 Kansas firms and 3 that I would consider really more national firms. Most of these, even the national firms, have a consultant in Kansas that's been a superintendent or something like that, and I think that is certainly one of the questions that we would want to ask when it comes down to the opportunity to interview any of the firms. As I was kind of thinking through them, other than the 2 Kansas firms, I think that they all have, in my opinion, fairly limited experience in Kansas. There were some of them that had, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 searches within the state. Obviously the 2 Kansas firms have done, a few from Greenbush and, hundreds from KSB. So, as I was thinking through how I ranked them, I'd really like to hear from both of them in an interview process and talk through both how the national firms would make sure that they covered Kansas well as from the Kansas firms, how they would expand their reach a little bit. I think that at least the way these read, a couple of them seem like it was more about putting ads in the paper and kind of waiting by the fax machine for resumes to come in, and a couple of them were much more about a process and using their network and trying to get out there and beat the bushes and maybe even find candidates that may not even be actively looking, but might be good choices. I think at the end of the day, my preference would be that we talk to at least one of the Kansas firms and at least one of the regional national firms, and how we fill that in below that, I could be, I think I could be pretty flexible. But I thought that Grunmeyer was the most impressive proposal in terms of the national firms, and I thought KSB's proposal was the better proposal of the more local firms. So, and again, I think that anything that we say tonight relative to these, 2-dimensional pieces of paper is somewhat inconsequential compared to actually talking to the people that will be helping us through the process. So it's a little bit of my perspective. Somebody else want to jump in and give some feedback?
I'll just add that I think kind of related to what you were saying, just as I was reading through these, some of the other criteria that I was looking for were ones that had kind of concrete plans to engage the community as part of the process. And I think some define that a lot more robustly than others.
I would agree.
So So I agree with you on Grundemeyer. I think the other two that I looked at that I thought described that well were McPherson and Ray. So I think one, I don't know that we'd need to interview both of them, but I think one of those might be another good possibility for a national search.
I would tend to agree. Linda, what are your thoughts?
I like in the part of Grundemeyer where they said that more than they had 100% satisfaction ratings from boards that they've worked with, and that more than 90% of their hires are still in the same district they were hired in after 7 years. And there was another one, which one was the one that said 10 years, that a very large percentage, 94% of the hires have lasted 10 years with HYA. Those are big things, because when we went through superintendents every 2 years for a while there. And
I think that the tenure is certainly something that means something to me as we both interview firms and candidates. I think that stability and predictability is well suited for Tonganoxie, and I think that would weigh heavily on my mind as we're trying to down select both firms and candidates. So I would agree with you, Linda. Stephanie, any thoughts?
Kind of the same thing. I like the stakeholders to have the opportunity to be able to communicate maybe their thoughts and ideas about who should be leading the school district, as well as like the board also putting in their input. So I do like the opportunity for them to be surveyed or form committees where other people can also express kind of their thoughts and opinions.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Just to add to that, because I don't know if you remember or not, but I would tell you these firms are working for us. So if that's collectively important to us as a board, I believe that would happen no matter what. And I believe that's important. I don't believe it is important to me for the community and the patrons of Tonganoxie to be involved. But I don't think that's a big ask to have committee, whatever, help identify what's important to Tonganoxie, what's important in the community to help identify the superintendent.
Yeah, and when I talk to most of these firms on the phone, just frankly, see if they pick up the phone, see if they're real before I send them an RFP. And I think that community engagement, I think every single one of them mentioned community engagement. I think we can kind of define what that means. There's probably a balance there between active community engagement, which I certainly think is important, and also being ahead of maybe other competitor schools when we make our offer. I would hate for that process to drag on months and months and we lose a good candidate, but that's not to say it's any less important. I just think the process and method by which you do it has to be measured and structured and the like. So
the proposals I kind of gravitated towards were the ones that had a little bit more of the data or the examples of kind of that, how they gathered the community feedback. So I'm kind of echoing what you guys were saying as well, but the proposals that had a little bit more of those examples, like I think it was Rain Associates and Grundemeyer were two kind of Midwestern firms that I like seeing a little bit more of the data there.
yeah,
I like that, especially I'm looking at Ray and Associates, that they had like a specific plan for each group of stakeholders, like a specific time for parents and community members, a specific time for students, a specific time for administrators, instead of just saying, everybody come, give us your ideas. They were very specific about inviting people at certain times, and I kind of like that, so that people feel a little bit of responsibility to do that.
yeah.
I think it helps keep everything directed towards, the end goal, having the different groups. And I'm really pleased with the rankings, we'll say. I actually selected the first one that you have there, and I really liked the way everything was laid out and how they engaged, like everybody else is saying, the community, but also their timeline and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the way I compiled those, would pass the muster from a statistician, but I think as I looked at the way the ranking came out and then went back through each individual's, it felt like it was pretty directionally correct, and frankly, Grunmeyer was towards the top of, one or two for most everybody in terms of who they wanted to talk to. Mr. Bruni astutely asked, and Otter was kind enough to get it for us, so just from a historical perspective, so we used KSB for this process in 2011 and 2018, and then used McPherson and Jacobson in 2016. I wouldn't want to read too much into that, but there were some ups and downs in there, and again, I don't know if the search firm can be held, wholly accountable or take the glory for either way on that, but just another interesting data point. The one other thing I thought I would share, the HYA, I'll stop short of saying research because I don't know that I really researched any of these, but I did notice HYA was typically a lot of their literature and the things about them were really big school districts, and Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, Blue Valley, those types of districts. And again, I don't know that means they're not well suited for us by any stretch, but there's probably slightly different approaches there depending on the size of the district. So I think that's something to keep in mind too. So
That kind of makes sense to me as I was looking at theirs, and I think it was the timeline there around their community engagement, like went really far into the process. Like I didn't know how those were being used, but that makes sense that they might have a lot more people that they were engaging in this conversation.
more people, more opinions, more types of stakeholders. So,
Yeah.
Theirs also seemed to be much longer process than the other groups. It was months longer.
And I think in from my perspective, there really is a sweet spot between being thorough and dragging this out. I mean, really good candidates will likely have numerous opportunities. We don't want somebody to get kind of stolen out from under our nose because we have 3 more steps to our process. That said, I wouldn't want to shortcut the process either. I think there is a sweet spot there from my perspective. So
On those timelines, though, each firm kind of laid out, potential start and end dates. I assume that if as a board we would like to, move it up or move it back, they would all be flexible with that.
My number one, I think we would ask that question when we interview these firms
Okay.
directly. But number two, my assumption would be, of course,
Mhm.
and I think we could even challenge them, to say, especially if we were having a hard time between deciding on the last 2, we could even challenge them to say, give me a timeline that represents the most typical case, and then give me a slightly more aggressive and a slightly more conservative timeline. I think we could challenge them that way too. I mean, they do this every day. They put out big documents in a week. I think they could knock out 3 timelines in an hour. So I think it'd be appropriate to challenge them on things like that.
I see that KASB has that they will customize timelines to fit our needs. And I would think that all of them would do that, maybe just didn't put it in there.
Well, I mean, I think, the national firms deal with multiple states, so I would guess not every state has their board meetings on the second Monday, so they probably have to work around that. I think that, depending on where this hits around the holidays, that could impact timelines fairly dramatically. So I think at the end of the day, they work for us, and we would be foolish to not leverage their experience. We don't do this, but at the same time, I think at the end of the day, if we said, no, I need one more week for stakeholder engagement, or, you know, these interviews have to push out or suck in a week, I think we could do that too.
Well, and I feel like the good news is we knew that we were going to have a lot of work, and the good news for us, this being my second time, we have more time to do and evaluate than I did and Karen and Stephanie the last time. It was it was just okay. In fairness, it was just okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's nice that Lauren announced, you know, his plan to give us the opportunity to take the proper steps to identify a good candidate, and you know, so I think we're ahead of the curve a little bit here for sure.
Well, and as I talked with these folks on the phone, I think that pretty universal that we are not behind the 8 ball at all. But I also think if you look at the steps, I mean, it won't take very many 1 week delays in this process, and we will be behind the 8 ball pretty quickly. So,
Sure.
you know, I tried to, you know, we only gave them less than 2 weeks to you know, submit an RFP, and you know, we're here a week after we receive the RFPs, and hopefully going to be interviewing them next week. And you know,
It's pretty quick.
it's pretty quick. But the other piece of it is, you know, candidly, I want them working for us. You know,
Right.
I'm glad to do this. This is important, but we've all got day jobs and other things we like to go do. So I'd like to get the smart people working on our behalf. So
For sure.
Any other discussion? Does anyone have any, so again, based on my rankings, not my rankings, my compiling your rankings, the kind of the order was Grundemeyer, Ray and Associates, KSB, Hazard Young, Mack and McPherson and Jacobson and Greenbush, and both Hazard Young and McPherson and Jacobson were kind of tied for that fourth spot. Does anyone have a strong opinion as to Hazard Young versus McPherson Jacobson, and or 5 candidates to interview versus 4?
And I
I'd
don't
be-
think it matters, in my opinion. I believe to not shortchange these folks, we're talking about 2 evenings, potentially,
I think it probably will be 2 evenings.
because this is going to be pretty lengthy.
I would guess these are 30 minutes minimal, but probably closer to 45 or maybe even an hour. I don't know. I think it could be 2 evenings.
Yeah, I would agree. That doesn't change my decision where I'm at as far as how many or whatever. I'm personally okay, like I said in the beginning, with how our results ranked. If we want 4, so be it. I'm good with the rankings the way they are. I'm good with 4. I'm also good with 3.
So, given that Hazard Young and McPherson and Jacobson were tied, I think my preference would be to keep it to 4, and I think mostly that's going to help us. That's going to ease our decision making down the road. I think McPherson and Jacobson has more of a regional feel. I would probably rank McPherson and Jacobson ahead of Hazard Young for the 4th, but does anyone have a strong opinion otherwise on that?
I would agree with that. I would also be open to just doing 3 as well, but
I think
Yeah.
the top 3 are fine
If we choose 3.
Yeah, if we choose 3, I think the top 3 on there are perfectly fine.
I still feel a little bit of worry with the McPherson, just having been through that with them. I don't understand, from what I understood when we hired our superintendent that they found, I understood that some things were hidden. I don't know exactly what happened, but
Well, I think that, I mean, what we know is they helped us find someone in 2016, and by 2018 we were looking again.
Mhm.
So we know that. The other stuff is probably somewhat hearsay, but
Right.
we know the longevity of that candidate wasn't lengthy. So,
Mhm.
I mean, so it would, we want to go with 3 or 4. Thoughts on 3 or 4?
I think 3.
You think 3?
I mean, I'm pretty I mean, I feel a lot of consensus around those top 3. So, I mean, I feel like they're all pretty good candidates, so.
Okay, and just for clarity here, when we say the top 3, we're talking about Grundemeyer, Ray, and KASB. Does anyone have any heartache with that if it was 3? Would we
I'm
look-
perfectly fine with that 3.
Okay. We ready to make a motion?
I think so.
Okay, I would move that we move to the next step of interviews with, based on this discussion and based on the RFP submitted with Grundmeyer Leader Search, Ray and Associates, and Kansas Association of School Boards. Is there a second?
A second.
All those in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried 6-0. All right, super. I will reach out to these folks tomorrow and see what their schedules are like next week. In terms of our schedules next week, well, before we go to schedules. So 2 of the 3 are not in state. I'm not personally necessarily a believer that, I guess we could leave it up to them and see if they have a resource they'd like for us to talk to that is in state. I'm open to having this conversation over Zoom. Now, I deal with that all day, every day. Not everybody does. Does anyone have a super strong opinion that it needs to be face to face? Probably prefer it face to face, but I want to keep it moving.
I feel the same. I mean, it would be great if they could be in person, but
Okay.
they don't need to.
So I will convey to them that to the extent possible, we'd love to have somebody here, but we also understand scheduling can be challenging. If you need to Zoom in, we will accommodate that. I think the other thing before we talk about availability, I would spend some time thinking about what specific questions you want to, now that we're down to 3, it's a little bit easier maybe to go back through those. I think we ought to really think about specific questions. If you are interested and want to send them to me, I don't mind kind of compiling the questions. I think the big question I'm always going to talk to them about their method and their process, and because I think that there's a lot of predictability gained from doing it the same way every time. I'm also going to kind of hone in on how a regional or national firm would target some Kansas folks, and likewise how a Kansas firm would target some regional folks. Those are the things that come to mind for me. But if you guys think of specific questions and send them to me, I'm glad to collate those. I do think we ought to give them a chance to make their pitch first. They'll likely have some slides, and maybe tell them something like you've got 25 minutes, and then we'll have 15 minutes for questions, and then maybe a little break, and then do another one or something like that. Does that sound reasonable?
Yep.
So do send me your questions, and I'll be glad to compile them. Availability for next week.
Tuesday's probably the only day that wouldn't be great for me.
So Ryan, it's not good for Tuesday.
Are we wanting all of us to be in person?
I just like we said, where they didn't necessarily need to be here. I think if somebody needed to dial in, they could do that too. I think to the extent that it's possible to be here in person, that would be great. The other thing, candidly, it's Thursday. I'm not sure I want to ask him to do it on Monday. Ryan's out Tuesday. I mean, maybe Wednesday, Thursday would be a better days to target. You have any conflicts on Wednesday, Thursday?
I can work around them.
Karen?
No.
So I can work around Wednesday, Thursday. Chris?
I'll just have to make whatever work.
I only have Thursday.
Okay. Stephanie could only do Thursday. Linda?
I'm good both days.
Okay, and Evan, I know you had some conflicts.
I have a conflict on Wednesday. Thursday, I'm out of town, but I could join
You
remotely.
could Zoom on Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay. Why don't, since we narrowed it down to 3, it may be a long evening, but why don't we see if we could get it done on Thursday? I'll reach out to these firms and see if they could accommodate Thursday and get back with everybody. If they can't do Thursday, we'll have to, I'd love to try and accomplish it next week, because ideally, I would love to be able to vote on this on our regular board meeting next Monday. But I have to reach out to their schedules will be a factor too.
And I think they are going to be able to give you some directive on how long they need. Because I agree, I think one evening with 3 is a possibility if we can make 5:30 work. Now it's going to be probably a long evening, but I think that's possible.
The bit more notice, I can move my schedule around. So
Okay.
I'm willing to come early. I hope
Okay.
that helps.
All right, let me see what their schedules are like and see how much time they think they generally need. Probably ask them all how much time they need, and we can kind of use the least common denominator to give them all the same time, because I think that'd be most appropriate. So I'll reach out to them and see what next Thursday looks like and report back as soon as possible. Okay, so I think the only thing I really, I've got the action to talk to the firms and work on logistics on next Thursday. If you guys would kind of compile any specific questions that you have and send them to me, and I'll pull them together and send them out. Any other discussion? Okay, I've said it before, but I'd echo Chris, and I mean, this is the most important thing we're probably going to get to do as a board. So it's busy and it's taken up some of our evenings, but I think it's well worth it. So appreciate everyone's time. Meeting adjourned.